Welcome, friends, to See the Light Art Projects. I'm Pat Nepley, and we're here to start a new project that's going to be made of 4 lessons. And you'll watch these lessons in sequence and work along with me on this art project. So I'm so glad you're here. Let's review what you're going to need just for this first lesson. You'll need some 11 by 14 poster board or Bristol board, a nice sharp pencil, a good white eraser, and a few pieces of fruit. And they can be real fruit or artificial fruit as long as they're different colors and different shapes. Okay, so for this project that we're going to be working on together, we're going to be talking about a very particular artist that was at the very end of the Impressionist period in France. His name is Georges Seurat. So when you learn a lot about art, you'll hear a lot of isms, Impressionism, Fauvism, realism, and those isms just talk about a period in art that defines a common theme or common style. Well, the period we're talking about now is actually kind of in between Impressionism and Post-Impressionism, post meaning after. So Paris, France was the center of the art world, and it had been for quite a while. And at the end of the 19th century, everyone wanted to go to France, especially Paris, to study art and be in that amazing culture of art. In fact, it wasn't just French artists. There was the American artist Mary Cassatt and the Spanish artist Pablo Picasso. And so artists loved to congregate together and learn from each other. And they would often exhibit at the Salon. And every year, there'd be these most amazing exhibits where new artists would come into vogue. Well, it was at this time there was an artist named Claude Monet who decided he didn't want to paint in that realistic style that the classical art schools had been teaching. And he painted in a very new and fresh style where he took whatever the first impression was of the scene and painted it rather quickly, right in the open air. It's called plein air painting, when you're out in the open and you paint right where you are what you see. Well, Claude Monet exhibited at the Salon a painting called Impression Sunrise. It was painted in 1872. But when it was displayed, critics panned it. They said it appeared to be unfinished. And Monet was interested in what the light did to the color. And so he painted with strokes of paint that didn't blend together, pure color right on the canvas, not a lot of earth tones. And it was new and different. Well, a particular art critic, knowing the title of this artwork, Impression Sunrise, mockingly called the artists that painted in the style the Impressionists. Well, that name stuck. And we know many artists today who were from that Impressionist period. And in fact, a lot of people consider the Impressionist work their favorite. It's so funny how things come about like that, where at first people will mock it or not like it. And yet then it becomes so incredibly popular and everyone wants to do it. Well, at the height of this Impressionist period in the late 19th century in France, there was a very young art student named Georges Seurat. He was born in 1859 in Paris to a very wealthy family. And when he was young, he decided he wanted to go to art school. And so he went to the L'École des Beaux-Arts in France, which was a very prestigious art school in Paris. And he received a monthly allowance from his parents so that he was able to pursue his art and not care about finances or how he would support himself. And while he was there, he studied all of the classical artists that had gone on before him. And he trained very hard. He was a very disciplined art student. Now, he did spend 1 year in the military, and he actually loved that disciplined lifestyle of the military, and it actually characterized Seurat for the rest of his career. Now, while he was in art school, he had to study a lot about color theory in order to learn how to paint. And so that's a key part of this project we're going to be doing together, friends, is understanding color theory. So let's just go back a little bit and get some basics, because this is going to really help us. And that's the color wheel. And so this is what every art student would learn about the color wheel, and you might have seen this before. And there's really 3 basic colors that every other color stems from, and these are called the primary colors. And those are yellow, red, and blue. And the colors in between them are called the secondary colors, and they're made from the combination of two primaries. So yellow and red combined make the secondary orange. Red and blue combined make the secondary violet, or we call it purple. And yellow and blue combined make the secondary green. Now, there's an infinite array of colors that can be made from this color wheel. All you have to do really is look at any crayon box or go to a home improvement store and go to the paint section where you see all the swatches. You see all of the varied colors. And everything starts, my friends, with the three primaries. In between here, of course, are all the shades that you can get. We go into color theory in a lot more detail in our See the Light art class series, so check that out. Now, understanding color theory was fascinating for Seurat. He loved the science of color theory. Why were certain colors more attractive to look at than others? Why, when you mixed certain concentrations of colors, did you get a more favorable result? And when you add white or black into the mix, then you have an even more infinite array of colors. Let me show you what it is that Seurat was most fascinated with. There's a particular chemist that he studied named Ogden Rood, and he had a book out at that time called Modern Chromatics, and it was all about color theory. Now, it was the science of color, which was really fascinating. So much discovery was happening at the end of the 19th century to advance science. And so, in addition to learning the classic art, a lot of artists were researching these new fields of science. So Ogden Rood said that there were certain things that happened with color when you put them together. And one of the things that Rood said that really stuck with Seurat was that your eye perceives color in the back of your retina regardless of what happens on the palette. So if you were to put two colors together next to each other and they were very fine, your eye would perceive them as a third distinct color, not the two separate colors. Ah, that fascinated Seurat. So he wanted to play around with this theory. So let me show you what I mean. So Rood's theory said, well, if you were to take a little bit of blue and a little bit of yellow, if you were to take small strokes or small swatches of color, and I'm just going to make some marks like this of yellow. Now you can see that that's yellow. And then if I take blue and I mix it in other words, I'm not making a color on my palette, I'm simply on the paper putting the colors near each other. That from a distance they'll be perceived as a color. Now it's harder to see on camera, my friends, but the theory was that the smaller you go, the smaller the strokes, and the further away, then your eye perceives it as a third distinct color. This is actually what happens, friends, when you're looking at your television. This is how it works with pixelation. If you were to go very closely up to your TV screen, they're actually very small squares of distinct color, or little pixels. But when you're away from it, it makes an image that looks perfectly normal, even though there's only certain colors that are very small. Well, of course, we didn't have pixelation in television back in the late 19th century, but artists were fascinated to learn how the eye perceived color. And so Rood's experiments as a chemist with color with light did translate in some part to color of paint. So Seurat really wanted to explore this further. And so one of the very first paintings he did as a young artist was called Bathers at Asnières. So here's that painting, and it's a huge painting. It was made in 1884. It took several years to complete, and it's a scene of laborers taking a swim on the Seine River. It's 7 feet by 10 feet, huge. I actually saw this painting in the National Gallery in London, and it's amazing to walk into that room and see a painting the size of a wall. And when you get up close, my friends, that's where you can see the distinct strokes that Seurat laid colors next to each other in order for the eye to perceive a third, totally distinct color. It's fascinating. He had to work that large, 7 feet by 10 feet, in order for the eye to really do the optical mixing. So when we go to do our project today, we can't possibly work as large as Seurat. But we are going to experiment, my friends, with optical mixing, where we're not going to mix the color we want on the palette. We're going to mix it onto our paper where we're doing our painting. Now, Seurat's most famous painting was Sunday Afternoon at Le Grand Jatte. And you might have seen this painting. And this is where he actually used the very point of his paintbrush. So instead of small strokes like the Bather's painting, he used tiny dots. It's hard to tell probably by looking at this painting on your screen. This was also done in 1884. But this painting, also 7 feet by 10 feet, was where Seurat totally committed to optical mixing. Pointillism fully. In fact, X-rays taken of this painting show that it was layer upon layer of small dots that built up until Seurat achieved the effect that he wanted. It's a masterpiece, and it took years and years of work. It's quite thrilling. Now, when I see something like that, where Seurat had to put tiny little points in order to get people to really see what he wanted, they had to step away and really see it. It reminds me of a great verse in Romans that I want to share with you. This is from Romans 1:20. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power, and his divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. See, even if someone doesn't have a Bible or has never heard about Jesus, they still have to know that God exists by simply looking around at the amazing creation that really reveals God's power, his awesomeness. And that's what this verse is talking about, that it's clearly seen who God is and what God can do when you just simply look around. So are you able to really see? Now, to start our project, we have to work on a much smaller scale than George Seurat. So we're going to start with something that's going to provide us with the color we want, a variety of color, and a variety of form that we want. Seurat loved to do these paintings of people at one of his favorite parks, Le Grand Jatte in Paris, and so he was fascinated with color and form. So we're going to use fruit, a common subject matter for artists, and it's readily available. So as far as your fruit, you can use real fruit or artificial fruit, but as long as you have a variety of color and a variety of shapes, I'd say 2 or 3 pieces at most. And what you're going to do, my friends, is set them off a little to the side of your desk or table, and you're going to arrange it so that you can see all 3 pieces fairly well. And you decide if you want to do your drawing vertically or horizontally. So for example, you can see here, here's one where I decided I wanted it to be horizontal. And in the sample, because this is the type of project we're going to be doing, I opted to do it vertically. So you can decide. But here's the important thing. I want you to draw fairly large, larger than life. When I say larger than life, this is the size of the apple. I don't want the apple on your paper to be this size. I want it to be larger than life, bigger. And the reason is, in order for pointillism to really be effective, you have to have tiny dots that cover a large space so that the eye can do the optical mixing. So if you work really small, you're not going to fit as many dots or points of our pointillism. So I want to work a little larger. But I don't want to work so large that it's going to take us a very long time to finish. It took Seurat over 2 years to do Sunday Afternoon. It took him 2 years to do Bathers at Asnières. Very long time. We don't want to take that much time, but we do want to get that effect. So you're going to draw a little bit larger. I don't want a lot of negative space or white space around your composition, so keep that in mind. Now, how do you get started on drawing your fruit? Well, we want to think in terms of the lowest thing on the page. That will be the item that's closest to you. And the tallest thing. So take a look at your arrangement, your fruit arrangement, and decide what the tallest thing is. It's probably the item that's furthest from you. So I can see that from my perspective, my pear is going to be at the top of my page. And where my banana and apple come together is the lowest thing on my page. So I think I'm going to go vertically, and I'm going to draw one piece of fruit first, and that will set the scale of what the size of the other fruit will be. So make sure your pencil is sharp, and I'm going to sketch, and you can be sketching your fruit as well as I'm talking through. So I always start with the bottom of the item that's closest to me. So I'm going to start with my apple. And because I'm going to do larger than life, I know I want to kind of make it fairly good, like maybe the size of my hand. And the best thing about drawing, friends, is to observe. So take some time. Really look at the form that you're drawing. And the way you do that is with the contour. So that's the outside edge of the apple. We talk a lot about how to draw a contour drawing in our art class series, so check that out. See the Lights art class. Let your eye trace around so you get really familiar with the shape, and then your hand can follow. So you should not be speeding through this, friends. You should take your time and constantly be looking back at your original so that you can see the shape. Now, an apple is not, apples are kind of interesting. They're not spherical like an orange is. They're kind of bumpy and lumpy in spots, and depending on the variety of apple, it's going to have a different shape. This apple is kind of like a red delicious apple, which means it's taller than some. And I don't want to forget my stem there. The stem is kind of wider at the end than it is there. It's got some bumps at the top. And of course, I'm drawing lightly so that I can erase if I need to. Now, I can't really see the very bottom of my apple because the banana's in the way, so I have to stop. So once I have my first piece of fruit, I can see it's larger than life, so larger than it really would be in person. And that sets the scale for the other items. Now, friends, if you start to draw and you realize when you place your other fruit you might run off the page, that's okay. You can either flip over your paper because we don't want to waste, and you can start again, or maybe you have to turn it so it's oriented differently. I've decided to do vertical. You might want to do horizontal. Totally depends on what your arrangement is. So now that I have the apple, I'm going to lightly sketch in what I see as where the banana ends up. And even though a banana is a long fruit, because of the way it's laying at an angle, it doesn't go straight across horizontally. It curves up like so. And I'm going to not complete the banana because I want to get my pear in there because that will help determine where my banana ends. Okay. Now I'm going to pay very careful attention to the spaces in between. So I'd like you to do that too. So spend some time and look where there's gaps. There's a shape to that negative space. So I can see a gap from my perspective where my apple and banana and pear all meet. And it's kind of a stretched out triangle shape. So I'm actually going to draw the shape, the negative shape, where all my fruit overlaps. So take a moment and make sure you're concentrating on the gaps. That will help you get the right balance and right shape of all of your fruit. So once you have the gaps taken care of, then you can lightly sketch in your other fruit. Now you might have a lemon or an orange, whatever fruit you like, as long as they're 3 different forms and 3 different colors. Perfect. So now that I have the pear and the apple, and I think their size related to each other corresponds to my example, now I can finish the banana because I can see how far up on my pear by looking. I'm doing a lot of looking, friends. You'll need to do a lot of looking. I can see how high up that banana goes relative to the pear. Okay, so all I need is 3 basic forms. Now, if I have some dark lines, you're going to want to lighten them up. And that you can just go over with your eraser and just lighten up those lines so they're not real dark. So I can still see everything, but I just don't want anything to be too dark. I don't want this is not a pencil drawing, this is going to be a painting. Okay. So once you're satisfied with our composition, you have your 3 pieces of fruit, we're ready to head on to the next step. You know, it's going to be exciting to be working on this project. It's probably something you've never done before, to work in the style of George Seurat, because George Seurat, so excited about color theory, so excited about the science behind it, decided to try something so new, so revolutionary in the art world, and that's this Pointillism, where we're using just the point of a brush in order to get the dots of color, and so that we're not mixing on the palette, but we're mixing with our eyes. It's going to be really exciting, friends, so I'll see you for the next lesson.